Two young people from rival families fall in love in secret, but they must face the consequences when their families discover the forbidden romance. The text message glowed on Hazel Mitchell's phone screen. "Meet me at Riverside Park, 11 p.m., same spa." Her heart raced as she quickly deleted it, a habit born from 3 months of secrecy. In a town like Providence, Rhode Island, where the Mitchell and Lancaster families had been locked in a decades-long feud over their rival shipping companies, even a simple message could spark a war. At 22, Hazel knew every detail of the bitter rivalry that had torn apart the city's waterfront business community. The Mitchells and Lancasters had once been partners, building Providence's largest shipping empire together in the 1980s, until a disputed contract and accusations of betrayal had shattered their alliance. Now, 40 years later, the families still fought over every contract, every client, every inch of dock space along the Providence River. She'd grown up being told that the Lancasters were ruthless, untrustworthy, and would stop at nothing to destroy her family's business, which made it particularly inconvenient that she'd fallen desperately in love with Adrian Lancaster. Hazel checked her reflection in her bedroom mirror, running her fingers through her dark curls. The summer evening air was thick with humidity as she grabbed her keys and headed downstairs. Her father Richard's voice drifted from his home office, where he was undoubtedly strategizing their latest move against Lancaster shipping. "I'm heading out to meet Madison," she called out, the lie smooth after months of practice. Madison Chun had been her best friend since college and made the perfect alibi, reliable, trustworthy, and always willing to cover for her. "Don't stay out too late, honey," her father replied. "Early meeting tomorrow about the new container terminal contract." The contract? It was all anyone in either family had talked about for months. The city was expanding its port facilities, and winning the exclusive contract to operate the new terminal would give either Mitchell Shipping or Lancaster Shipping a decisive advantage in their endless competition. The stakes were higher than ever, which made her secret relationship with Adrian even more dangerous. Hazel slipped out into the night, taking her usual circuitous route to Riverside Park to ensure she wasn't followed. The park had become their sanctuary, a neutral ground far enough from the waterfront business district where both families operated. As she approached their meeting spot, a secluded bench overlooking the river, she saw Adrian's familiar silhouette in the darkness. Her pulse quickened as she drew closer. At 24, Adrian was everything she'd been taught to hate: charming, ambitious, and proudly carrying the Lancaster name. His brown hair fell across his forehead in that perfectly imperfect way that had first caught her attention at a charity gala 3 months ago. That night, they both slipped away from their families' carefully separated tables and found themselves alone on the venue's balcony. One conversation had led to another, and suddenly all the years of inherited hatred had seemed meaningless compared to the connection they'd felt. "I was starting to worry you wouldn't come," Adrian said softly as she sat beside him. He reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers in the darkness. "Sorry, had to wait for Dad to get stuck on a business call." Hazel leaned her head against his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne. "How bad was it at your place today?" Adrian tensed slightly. "Dad's obsessed with the terminal contract. He's convinced your father is trying to bribe the Port Authority chairman." He paused. "Is he?" "Adrian, you know I can't talk about that." Hazel pulled away slightly, the familiar wall of family loyalty rising between them. "Just like I don't ask you about your family's business dealings." I know, he sighed, running his free hand through his hair. "I just hate all the suspicion and accusations. Sometimes I wonder what would happen if we just told them about us. Maybe it would force them to finally end this ridiculous feud." Hazel's stomach clenched at the thought. "You've seen how they are. My father still talks about your grandfather's betrayal like it happened yesterday. Finding out about us wouldn't bring peace. It would make everything worse. So what's your plan? We keep meeting in secret forever? Get married in disguise? Have kids who have to pretend not to be related to half their family?" The words hung in the warm night air between them. They'd never talked about marriage or children before, and the sudden mention of a future together made Hazel's heart race with both longing and fear. "I don't know," she admitted quietly. "I just know that right now, being with you is worth all the sneaking around, even if it's complicated." Adrian turned to face her, his expression serious in the dim light. "Something has to change, Hazel. This contract fight is making both our families crazy. Dad's talking about filing lawsuits, making accusations of corporate espionage. If they're this brutal as business rivals, imagine how they'll react when they find out about us. And they will find out eventually. We can't hide forever." Deep down, Hazel knew he was right. Every secret meeting, every careful lie, every deleted text message was just postponing the inevitable explosion. Their family's feud had shaped Providence's business community for decades. Now, their love threatened to either heal that ancient wound or tear it open even wider. A distant church bell tolled midnight, making them both jump. Their stolen time was running out, as it always did. "I should go," Hazel said reluctantly. "Dad's morning meeting." Adrian nodded, but didn't release her hand. "Meet me again tomorrow? Same time?" "Of course." She leaned in to kiss him goodbye, trying to memorize the feeling of his lips on hers, the warmth of his touch, the way the world seemed to fade away when they were together. As she walked back to her car, Hazel's mind raced with Adrian's words about their future. The weight of their family's expectations and decades of hatred pressed down on her shoulders. Something would have to give eventually. She just prayed that when it did, their love would be strong enough to survive the fallout. Little did she know, the careful balance they'd maintained was already beginning to crumble. In less than 24 hours, a chance encounter would set in motion events that would force their secret into the open, testing not only their relationship but the very foundations of both families' legacies. The morning sun glinted off the Providence River as Adrian Lancaster strode through the bustling waterfront district. Every step took him past another reminder of the Mitchell-Lancaster feud, competing shipping offices, rival warehouses, even separate coffee shops where employees of each company clustered in their own territories. He just left another tense meeting about the terminal contract, where his father Marcus had spent 2 hours outlining their strategy to outmaneuver Mitchell Shipping. "We didn't build this company by playing nice," his father had said, pacing the conference room like a caged lion. "Richard Mitchell's trying to lowball the bid, promising the city cost savings that aren't realistic. We need to expose their numbers for the fantasy they are." Adrian had nodded along, feeling like a traitor. How could he sit there planning corporate warfare while secretly meeting the enemy's daughter every night? But then he thought of Hazel's smile, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her dreams of modernizing the shipping industry, and how none of their family's hatred seemed to matter when they were together. Lost in thought, he rounded the corner onto Thames Street and collided hard with someone hurrying in the opposite direction. Papers scattered across the sidewalk as both of them stumbled. "I'm so sorry, I wasn't..." Adrian's voice trailed off as he recognized Madison Shunn, Hazel's best friend and most frequent alibi. Their eyes met with mutual recognition and shock. "Adrian Lancaster," Madison said carefully, kneeling to gather her dropped documents. Her tone carried a weight of understanding that made his stomach clench. After all these months of secrecy, had they finally slicked up? "Let me help you with those." He crouched down beside her, trying to act casual as he collected papers. A glimpse of one document made him freeze. It was a financial analysis comparing Mitchell Shipping's bid for the terminal contract with their competitors. Confidential information that could be devastating in the wrong hands. Madison snatched the paper away quickly, but not before Adrian had seen enough to confirm his father's suspicions. The Mitchell bid was artificially low, based on some very creative accounting, the kind of discovery that could torpedo their proposal if revealed. "I won't say anything about the bid," he said quietly, standing up. "Just like I hope you won't mention running into me to anyone." Madison studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "You know, don't you, about Hazel?" Adrian's heart raced. This was the moment where everything could unravel. But looking at Madison's face, he saw not judgment but concern. "Yes," he admitted. "For 3 months now. I've been covering for her all this time, telling myself it was just a phase she needed to get out of her system." Madison glanced around to ensure no one was within earshot. "But it's more than that, isn't it?" "I love her," Adrian said simply. It was the first time he'd said those words to anyone but Hazel. Madison sighed, clutching her recovered papers to her chest. "Then you need to be more careful. I saw you two in Riverside Park last week. I was running late at night and caught a glimpse. If I recognized you, others could too. The warning sent a chill through Adrian. They thought their meeting spot was safe, but clearly they'd grown complacent. Thank you for not saying anything. I'm protecting Hazel, not you, Madison replied sharply. But Adrian, this bit information you just saw, if you use it against Mitchell Shipping, you'll destroy any chance you and Hazel might have. The implied threat was clear, his silence for hers. But Adrian was already shaking his head. I would never use that against them. Against her? See that you don't. Madison stepped around him, then paused. She's happy, you know. Happier than I've seen her in years. Don't make me regret keeping your secret. As Madison walked away, Adrian leaned against the nearest building, his mind racing. The chance encounter had exposed how fragile their careful dissection really was. One wrong move, one loose thread pulled, and everything could collapse. His phone buzzed, a message from his father demanding he return to the office immediately. Apparently, someone had spotted Richard Mitchell entering the Port Authority chairman's private club earlier that morning. The accusations of corruption and backroom deals were about to fly, and Adrian was expected to join the attack. He thought of Hazel, of the trust they'd built between them despite their family's hatred. How could he sit in another strategy meeting, planning to destroy her family's company, while pretending his heart didn't belong to the enemy? The sound of familiar voices approaching sent Adrian ducking into a nearby doorway. A group of Mitchell Shipping executives walked past, including Hazel's older brother Cameron. They were laughing about something, probably celebrating their confident bid for the terminal contract. The same bid Adrian now knew was built on shaky foundations. Once they passed, Adrian straightened his tie and stepped back onto the sidewalk, his decision made. He couldn't keep straddling this divide forever, playing both sides while his heart pulled him in one clear direction. Something had to change, and after this morning's encounter with Madison, the clock was ticking. He pulled out his phone and typed a message to Hazel. Need to see you. Earlier than usual. Emergency. As soon as he hit send, he felt the weight of what he was about to do. Their careful balancing act was about to end, one way or another. Across town, Hazel was sitting in her own family's offices, half listening to her father rail against the Lancasters' latest accusations. Her phone buzzed with Adrian's message, and her blood ran cold at the word emergency. As she stared at the screen, another message appeared. This one from Madison. We need to talk. Now. The carefully constructed walls between her two worlds were beginning to crack. By sunset, secrets long buried in both families would rise to the surface, forcing Hazel and Adrian to choose between loyalty to their blood and the love they'd found in each other's arms. The game of hidden meetings and whispered promises was coming to an end, but neither of them could predict the price they'd have to pay for their forbidden love. Madison's office at the Providence Journal was exactly 8 blocks from Mitchell Shipping's headquarters, close enough for a quick lunch meeting, far enough that Hazel wouldn't likely run into anyone from either shipping company. As she hurried through the bustling streets, Hazel's mind raced with possibilities. What emergency had Adrian texted about, and why did Madison need to speak with her so urgently? The newspaper's modernist building loomed ahead, its glass facade reflecting the midday sun. Madison was waiting in the lobby, her usual composed expression replaced by obvious concern. She wordlessly led Hazel to a small conference room and closed the door. I ran into Adrian Lancaster this morning, Madison said without preamble. Hazel sank into a chair, her legs suddenly weak. What happened? Literally ran into him. Scattered confidential Mitchell Shipping documents all over Thames Street. Madison's fingers drummed nervously on the conference table. He saw your family's bid numbers, Hazel. All of them. The implications hit Hazel like a physical blow. The creative accounting her father had used to undercut the competition, accounting she'd argued against in private meetings, was now known to the enemy. Or rather, known to the man she loved, which was infinitely more complicated. He said he wouldn't use the information, Madison continued, studying her friend's reaction. But that's not what worries me. I've been watching you sneak around for months, covering for you, telling myself it wasn't my place to interfere. But this is bigger than just you and Adrian now. Your father's company, his reputation, dozens of jobs, they're all at risk. Adrian would never betray my trust, Hazel insisted, but even as she said the words, doubt crept in. She'd grown up hearing stories of Lancaster betrayals. What if love wasn't enough to overcome generations of mistrust? Maybe not intentionally, Madison replied, but secrets have a way of coming out, especially with this much pressure. The terminal contract, the family feud, your romance, something's got to give. Hazel's phone buzzed again, another message from Adrian. Meet me at Roger Williams Park, the Botanical Center, as soon as you can. He wants to meet now, Hazel said, showing Madison the message. Says it's an emergency. Madison's expression softened. Go. But Hazel, whatever you decide, remember that this isn't just about you and Adrian anymore. There are bigger consequences at stake. The drive to Roger Williams Park felt endless. Hazel parked near the Botanical Center, its Victorian-style greenhouse rising like a crystal palace among the manicured gardens. She found Adrian inside, pacing among the tropical plants. His usual confidence replaced by obvious agitation. I can't do this anymore, he said as soon as she approached. The lying, the sneaking around, watching our families tear each other apart while we pretend it doesn't affect us. Madison told me about this morning, Hazel replied, reaching for his hand. About the bid documents. Adrian gripped her fingers tightly. Your father's playing a dangerous game with those numbers, Hazel. When the truth comes out, if the truth comes out, she corrected sharply, pulling her hand away. Are you planning to expose him? Of course not, but my father's suspicious already. He's hiring forensic accountants to examine every detail of the Mitchell bid. It's only a matter of time before they find the same things I saw this morning. The humid air inside the greenhouse felt suffocating. Through the glass walls, Hazel could see families strolling through the park, couples holding hands openly, children playing without a care in the world. Such simple freedoms that seemed impossible in their complicated reality. Then what are you suggesting? She asked, though part of her already knew the answer. We tell them, all of them, tonight. Adrian's voice was steady despite the magnitude of what he was proposing. No more secrets, no more lies. We face whatever comes together. You don't understand what you're asking, Hazel protested. My father's whole life is this company. The terminal contract could secure Mitchell Shipping's future for generations. If it all falls apart because of us, it's falling apart anyway. Adrian stepped closer, his intensity drawing the attention of nearby visitors. Lowering his voice, he continued, Your father's bid is built on sand. My father's obsession with destroying Mitchell Shipping is consuming him. They're both so focused on this ancient feud that they can't see what it's doing to their families, their employees, this whole city. Hazel closed her eyes, remembering countless family dinners dominated by business discussions, strategy meetings where revenge seemed more important than profit, the weight of expectations that had shaped her entire life. And you think our relationship going public will somehow fix all that? No, Adrian admitted, but at least it would be real. Everything else, the corporate espionage, the legal threats, the manipulated numbers, it's all just poison spreading through both our families. Maybe learning that their children found love instead of hate could be the wake-up call they need. A child's laughter echoed through the greenhouse, making them both turn. A little girl was pointing excitedly at a butterfly landing on a nearby flower, her parents smiling together at her joy. Such a simple moment of family happiness, yet it felt like a glimpse into an impossible future. Madison thinks we're being selfish, Hazel said quietly, that we're putting our feelings above everything our families have built. Maybe we are. Adrian's hand found hers again, but isn't there something selfish about their feud too? About letting a 40-year-old betrayal dictate everyone's lives? At some point, someone has to be brave enough to break the cycle. Hazel's phone buzzed, a message from her father asking where she was. The real world was intruding on their sanctuary, as it always did, but this time felt different. The weight of secrets had become too heavy to bear. Tonight, she found herself saying, after the Port Authority's preliminary meeting, whatever happens there, we tell them tonight. Adrian pulled her close, holding her as if he could protect her from the storm they were about to unleash. Around them, the greenhouse's exotic plants reached toward the sun, growing despite the glass barriers surrounding them. Soon, they too would have to break free of the walls they'd built around their love, facing whatever consequences awaited in the harsh light of truth. Neither of them could know that across town, another series of events was unfolding that would make their planned revelation seem trivial by comparison. The fate of both families, in their future together, would be decided not by their careful plans, but by a discovery that would shake Providence's business community to its core. The Port Authority building stood like a sentinel over Providence Harbor, its modern architecture a stark contrast to the historic waterfront. Inside the fifth-floor conference room, representatives from the city's shipping companies sat in careful separation, Mitchell's on one side, Lancaster's on the other, smaller operators scattered between them like neutral territories in an ongoing war. Hazel sat beside her father, hyper-aware of Adrian's presence across the room. She'd spent countless meetings like this studiously avoiding eye contact with him, but today felt different. In a few hours, everything would change. Port Authority Chairman Douglas Walsh cleared his throat, commanding attention. Before we begin the preliminary bid reviews, there's a matter that requires immediate attention. He gestured to a man Hazel didn't recognize, who began distributing folders to everyone present. This morning, our internal audit team made a troubling discovery. Hazel's father Richard tensed beside her. Across the room, Marcus Lancaster's expression shifted from bored to predatory. The room crackled with sudden tension. 2 weeks ago, Walsh continued, someone accessed our secure servers and downloaded confidential bid specifications, information that would give certain parties an unfair advantage in this process. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. We've traced the breach to an IP address registered to Lancaster Shipping. The explosion was immediate. Richard Mitchell leaped to his feet, face flushed with vindication. I knew it. 40 years of Lancaster tricks, and finally we have proof. Marcus Lancaster's chair crashed backward as he stood. This is absurd. We've submitted everything through proper channels. Mitchell's obviously trying to frame us. Frame you? Richard's laugh was bitter. You've been stealing and cheating since before your son was born, Marcus. Like father, like son. Don't you dare bring my son into this. Marcus thundered, and Hazel saw Adrian flinch at being caught between the warring patriarchs. Chairman Walsh banged his gavel repeatedly. Gentlemen, this matter has been referred to the FBI's Cybercrime Division. Until their investigation is complete, all bid proceedings are suspended. The announcement hit like a bomb. Both families had invested millions in their proposals. A suspension could be financially devastating. Hazel watched her father sink back into his chair, the color draining from his face as 40 years of business rivalry culminated in this moment of mutual destruction. But it was Adrian's expression that truly caught her attention. He was staring at his laptop screen, his face ashen, as if sensing her gaze. He looked up, their eyes meeting across the chaos of the conference room. He gave a slight shake of his head, a warning, a denial. Before she could interpret it, he was typing furiously on his phone. Moments later, her phone buzzed. Adrian's message made her blood run cold. The breach came from my computer, but I swear I didn't do it. Hazel's mind raced. Adrian had access to the bid documents that morning. He'd seen them scattered on the street, but these were different documents, accessed 2 weeks ago. The timing didn't make sense, unless her thoughts were interrupted by Cameron, her brother, who had been quietly working on his tablet throughout the commotion. Dad, he said, loud enough to cut through the ongoing arguments. You need to see this. Richard Mitchell leaned over to look at Cameron's screen. His expression hardened. Walsh, he called out, before you contact any federal agents, I suggest you check the access logs again, particularly the ones from Mitchell Shipping's network. The room fell silent. Chairman Walsh frowned, consulting his own documents. What exactly are you suggesting, Mr. Mitchell? I'm suggesting, Richard said heavily, that someone has been accessing both companies' secure servers, someone with inside knowledge of both operations. His gaze swept the room, settling briefly on Hazel before moving on. Someone trying to pit us against each other? Hazel felt the blood drain from her face. She looked at Adrian again, seeing her own realization mirrored in his expression. Someone had used his computer to access the Port Authority servers, just as someone had been accessing Mitchell Shipping's confidential data. someone who knew enough about both families to navigate their systems. Madison's warning echoed in her mind. This is bigger than just you and Adrian now. Cameron was already pulling up more data on his tablet. The breach patterns are identical. Same methods, same time steps. Someone's been playing both sides. Marcus Lancaster had gone very still, his earlier anger replaced by calculation. How long has this been going on? 3 months, Cameron replied. Starting the night of the Maritime Heritage Gala. The night Hazel and Adrian had first met. The night their secret romance began. The coincidence was too perfect to be chance. Chairman Walsh was gathering his papers. This meeting is adjourned. I expect full cooperation from both companies with the upcoming investigation. Until then, all contract discussions are frozen. As the room began to empty, Hazel felt her carefully constructed world crumbling. Someone had discovered her relationship with Adrian and was using it to destroy both families. But who? And why choose now to spring the trap? Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Adrian. Don't leave. Wait until everyone's gone. We need to talk. She watched her father storm out with Cameron, watched Marcus Lancaster huddle with his lawyers, watched the smaller operators scurry away from the imploding situation. Finally, only she and Adrian remained in the conference room, the weight of unspoken accusations hanging between them. Someone knows about us, Adrian said quietly, moving to sit beside her. They've been watching us for months, using our meetings as cover to access both companies' networks. But who would? Hazel stopped, a horrible thought forming. Madison saw us in the park last week. She knows everything. Madison's not the only one who could have seen us, Adrian replied. Think about it. Who else would have access to both companies' systems? Who would benefit from destroying both Mitchell and Lancaster shipping? Before Hazel could respond, the conference room door opened. They both turned, expecting Chairman Walsh or perhaps one of their fathers returning. Instead, they found themselves facing someone they never expected to see. Someone whose presence suddenly made the entire conspiracy terrifyingly clear. The true architect of their family's destruction had finally decided to reveal themselves, and nothing would ever be the same. Uncle Robert? Adrian's voice cracked with disbelief as Robert Lancaster stepped into the conference room, closing the door behind him with deliberate calm. Hazel's mind raced. Robert Lancaster, Marcus's younger brother, the family's black sheep who'd left Providence 15 years ago after a bitter falling out. She'd heard stories about him from company veterans, whispered tales of the Lancaster brother who'd walked away from the family empire. Hello, nephew. Robert's smile didn't reach his eyes as he pulled up a chair across from them. He looked remarkably like Marcus, but harder somehow, aged by bitterness rather than time. And Hazel Mitchell, you've grown into quite the spitting image of your mother. You've been spying on us, Adrian said, his initial shock hardening into anger. Using my computer to access the Port Authority servers. How? Come now, Adrian. Who do you think designed Lancaster Shipping's first network security system? Passwords change, but backdoors? Robert's laugh was cold. Those tend to get overlooked during upgrades, especially when the original programmer is long forgotten. But Mitchell Shipping's systems, Hazel began, were pathetically easy to access once I had a way in through Lancaster's network. Your IT department really should update their protocols. Robert leaned back, studying them both. Though I have to admit, you two made it almost too easy. All those secret meetings, all that sneaking around, perfect cover for someone who needed to access both companies' data after hours. The pieces were falling into place in Hazel's mind. You've been watching us since the gala, following us to Riverside Park. Honestly, I couldn't believe my luck when I saw you two together that night. Romeo and Juliet of the shipping industry. It was too perfect. I knew everyone would be so focused on the scandal of your relationship that no one would look too closely at the real damage being done behind the scenes. Why? Adrian's voice was quiet, dangerous. Why try to destroy both companies? Robert's composed facade cracked slightly, revealing the rage beneath. Why? Because your father and Richard Mitchell destroyed everything I helped build. This company was my life too, Adrian. I developed half the systems they still use today, but when I suggested modernizing, expanding beyond shipping into logistics technology, your father shut me down. Said I was trying to undermine the family legacy. So this is about revenge? Hazel asked, her mind already racing ahead to possibilities, solutions. This is about justice? Robert stood, pacing the conference room like a caged animal. I tried to warn them 15 years ago that technology would change everything. Now look, Amazon building their own shipping fleet, automated ports in Rotterdam and Singapore, while Mitchell and Lancaster's shipping fight over scraps like it's still 1985. The terminal contract, Adrian realized. You're not just trying to stop it, you're trying to make sure neither company survives. The fallout. Robert's smile returned, colder than ever. Once the FBI starts digging, they'll find evidence of corporate espionage, bid rigging, financial fraud, carefully planned over 3 months. Impossible to tell what's real and what isn't. Both companies will be tied up in investigations and lawsuits for years. By the time it's over, the industry will have moved on without them. You're going to destroy hundreds of jobs, Hazel protested. Families that depend on both companies. Collateral damage. Robert waved his hand dismissively. The industry needs disruption. Sometimes you have to burn everything down to build something better. This isn't about industry disruption. Adrian stood, his voice shaking with anger. This is about punishing my father. Using me to do it. Using you? Robert laughed. Oh, nephew, you did this all on your own. Falling for a Mitchell? Your father's going to be devastated. Almost as devastated as when the FBI traces the server breach to your computer. Ice formed in Hazel's stomach. You're going to frame Adrian for everything? It's elegant, isn't it? Star-crossed lovers conspiring to destroy both families. The evidence is already in place. Access logs from Adrian's computer, financial documents downloaded during your secret meetings, emails I've been collecting for months. The scandal of your relationship will make everything else completely believable. Hazel reached for Adrian's hand, squeezing it tightly. She could feel him trembling with suppressed rage. Why tell us this now? She asked. Why reveal yourself? Because in about 30 minutes, an anonymous tip is going to send the FBI everything they need to start their investigation. I wanted you to understand why your little romance is going to bring down 2 of New England's oldest shipping companies. Robert checked his watch. Consider it a courtesy, given that you made my plan so much easier to execute. You really think we're just gonna let you do this? Adrian took a step forward, but Robert pulled something from his jacket. A small recording device. Every word of this conversation has been recorded. One wrong move, and this goes straight to the press. Imagine the headlines. Star-crossed lovers confess to corporate espionage. Your declarations of innocence won't matter once the media frenzy starts. Hazel's mind raced through options, searching for a way out. There had to be something they'd missed, some detail that could turn this around. The timestamps, she said suddenly. Cameron said the breaches started the night of the gala, but Adrian and I didn't meet until later that evening. The first breach happened during the speeches. Adrian caught on immediately. When I was sitting at our family's table, in full view of 100 people, including the Port Authority chairman. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Robert's face. Before he could respond, another voice spoke from the doorway. And I have dozens of photos from the Foundation's official photographer proving it. They all turned to find Madison Chin standing there, her phone held up like a weapon. I'm a journalist, Mr. Lancaster. Did you really think I wouldn't investigate when I noticed something strange about my best friend's secret romance? I've been gathering my own evidence for weeks. The look of triumph on Robert's face crumbled as he realized his perfect plan had overlooked one crucial detail. The power of a friend who had seen the truth all along. But even as hope flared in Hazel's heart, she knew this was far from over. They had minutes to act before Robert's anonymous tip reached the FBI. Everything would depend on what they did next, and whether their love was strong enough to save not just themselves, but both their families from destruction. The next 3 minutes in the Port Authority conference room unfolded like a high-stakes chess match. Robert Lancaster lunged for the door, but Madison blocked his path, her phone still recording. Adrian moved to grab the recording device from his uncle's hand, while Hazel frantically dialed her brother Cameron's number. Don't waste your time calling for help, Robert snarled, backing away from both his nephew and the door. In 25 minutes, Every news outlet in New England will have evidence of both companies' corruption. Your families are finished. Cameron, Hazel spoke rapidly into her phone. Remember that backdoor protocol Dad had you closed last month during the security audit? Check if there's a similar one in the Lancaster system. Uncle Robert says he built it 15 years ago. She put the phone on speaker just as Cameron replied. Already on it, the breach patterns look familiar. It's an old remote access protocol that was standard in the early 2000s. I'm tracking the source now, got it? Someone's actively uploading files from an IP address at the Marina Bay Hotel. His laptop, Adrian realized, he's got everything set to send automatically. Robert's composed facade cracked further. You can't stop it. The files are encrypted. By the time you break in, I don't need to break in, Madison interrupted, her phone now displaying what looked like an email draft. I just need to make one call to my editor. Disgraced former executive attempts corporate sabotage. Exclusive evidence of premeditated fraud by Robert Lancaster. How's that for a headline? You're bluffing, Robert said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. You can't prove anything. Really? Madison's smile was sharp. Because I have 6 weeks of surveillance photos, documentation of your movements around Providence, and now a recorded confession. Plus, I'm betting those files you're about to leak are stored on the laptop in your hotel room. The one you checked into under your own name. Not very subtle for someone planning corporate espionage. Hazel watched the calculation play across Robert's face as his options dwindled. On her phone, Cameron was still talking. Police are on their way to the hotel. Should have the laptop secured in 10 minutes. It's over, Uncle Robert, Adrian said quietly. Even if those files get out, Madison's evidence proves you fabricated everything. You won't destroy our families. You'll just destroy yourself. Your families, Robert spat the word like poison, are already destroying themselves. You think this contract fight is the end? Marcus and Richard will keep finding new ways to tear each other apart until there's nothing left. I'm just accelerating the inevitable. Maybe, Hazel stepped forward still holding Adrian's hand. Or maybe there's another way, one that doesn't end with both companies in ruins. Understanding dawned in Adrian's eyes. The logistics technology you wanted to develop 15 years ago, it's exactly what both companies need now. Together. Together? Robert's laugh was bitter. Have you met your fathers? They'd never. They might, Madison interjected, if they were forced to recognize how much damage their feud has already caused, and how close they came to losing everything because of it. She held up her phone again. I have a different story I could write, one about healing old wounds and adapting to change. Your choice, Mr. Lancaster. The tension in the room stretched like a wire about to snap. Through the conference room windows, Hazel could see the harbor where both family empires had been built. Ships bearing the Mitchell and Lancaster logos moved through the water, separate but parallel, like the lives she and Adrian had been living. Robert sank into a chair, suddenly looking older. It was never about the technology, not really. Your father, he looked at Adrian, couldn't stand the idea that his younger brother might be right about something, that the company our father built might need to change. Then help us change it, Adrian said. The right way this time. Your expertise combined with both companies' resources. Stop. Robert held up his hand. Just stop. You sound just like I did at your age, full of ideas about cooperation and progress. He pulled out his phone, fingers moving across the screen. There, I've canceled the file transfer. The laptop at the hotel will prove it. He looked at Madison. Write whatever story you want. I'm too tired to care anymore. As if on cue, Hazel's phone buzzed with a text from Cameron. Police have the laptop. Files never sent. We're clear. The immediate crisis was over, but Hazel knew the harder part was still to come. She looked at Adrian, seeing her own thoughts reflected in his eyes. It was time. Madison, she said, I need you to write 2 stories. First, the truth about what Robert tried to do today, but hold it for 24 hours. And the second story? Madison asked, though her expression suggested she already knew. The one about us, Adrian answered, squeezing Hazel's hand. About how the next generation of Mitchells and Lancasters found a better way forward. Your fathers will never accept it, Robert warned, but there was something different in his voice now, almost like respect. Maybe not at first, Hazel acknowledged, but they're about to learn how close they came to losing everything because they couldn't let go of the past. That tends to change perspectives. Madison was already typing on her phone. I have both stories ready. But Hazel, Adrian, are you sure? Once this goes public, we're sure, they said simultaneously, then shared a small smile at the jinx. As Madison led a subdued Robert Lancaster out to wait for the police, Hazel and Adrian stood alone in the conference room. The late afternoon sun painted the harbor in shades of gold and purple, a reminder that this day was nearly over. By tomorrow, everything would be different. I should go find my father, Adrian said softly. Tell him everything before he hears it from someone else. Hazel nodded. I need to talk to Cameron first, then Dad. They'll take it better coming from both of us. They were nearly to the door when Adrian stopped, pulling Hazel close. No matter what happens next, he whispered. I love you. I love you too, she replied, letting herself lean into him for just a moment longer. They had won the battle against Robert's revenge, but the war for their family's acceptance was just beginning. As they parted ways in the Port Authority lobby, each heading toward their own difficult conversations, Hazel felt something she hadn't expected: hope. Perhaps it had taken nearly losing everything to show both families a truth they had forgotten. That love was stronger than ancient grudges, and the future mattered more than the past. Richard Mitchell's private office occupied the top floor of Mitchell Shipping's headquarters, its wall of windows offering a commanding view of Providence Harbor. As Hazel stood before her father's desk, Cameron solid and supportive beside her, she could see the Lancaster building across the water, where Adrian was having a similar conversation with his own father. A Lancaster? Richard's voice was deadly quiet. He hadn't raised it once during Hazel's explanation, which somehow made it worse. All this time, you've been seeing Marcus Lancaster's son? Yes. Hazel met her father's gaze steadily. For 3 months now, since the Maritime Heritage Gala. Dad, Cameron interjected, before you say anything else, you need to know something. Hazel and Adrian just helped save both our companies. If they hadn't figured out what Uncle Robert was planning, Robert Lancaster. Richard's hand clenched on his desk. Another Lancaster betrayal. As if we needed more proof that family can't be trusted. That's not fair, Hazel protested. Adrian helped expose Robert's plan. He chose protecting our company over family loyalty. Did he? Richard stood, pacing before the windows. Or was that just part of a longer game? Get close to my daughter, play the hero, then use it to negotiate a merger when both companies are vulnerable? The suggestion was so absurd that Hazel almost laughed. Dad, Adrian didn't even know about Robert's plan until today. Madison has proof, photographs, surveillance records, everything. She's running the whole story in tomorrow's paper. That stopped Richard's pacing. The press? You're taking this public? Madison's holding the story about Robert for 24 hours, Cameron explained, giving both families time to process everything privately. But yes, by tomorrow evening, everyone will know what happened, including Hazel and Adrian's relationship. Richard sank back into his chair, suddenly looking older than Hazel had ever seen him. Do you have any idea what this will do to our reputation? Our standing in the community? 40 years I've spent building this company. Building it into what, Dad? Hazel interrupted, her voice breaking. A fortress against the Lancasters? A monument to an old grudge? Look around. While you and Marcus Lancaster have been fighting the same battles for decades, the entire industry has been changing. Robert was right about one thing. We've fallen behind. So that's your solution? Run into the arms of the enemy? No. Hazel moved closer to her father's desk. My solution is to stop seeing everyone as enemies, to recognize that maybe the next generation of Mitchells and Lancasters could build something better together than our families ever built apart. A knock at the door interrupted them. Richard's assistant poked her head in, looking nervous. Mr. Mitchell, Marcus Lancaster is here. He's quite insistent on speaking with you. Hazel's heart raced. Adrian must have finished his own conversation. This was the moment everything would either fall apart or, somehow, begin to heal. Marcus Lancaster strode into the office like an approaching storm, his face flushed with anger. Adrian followed, his expression a mix of determination and concern as his eyes met Hazel's. "Your daughter," Marcus growled at Richard, "has corrupted my son." "My daughter?" Richard stood again. "Your son has been sneaking around with her for months, probably feeding Lancaster, shipping every piece of information he could get. Stop it." Adrian's voice cut through the brewing argument. "Both of you to stop. We didn't share any company information. We didn't plot or scheme or spy. We fell in love. That's all. That's all." Marcus turned on his son. "You're throwing away generations of what?" Hazel moved to stand beside Adrian. "Hatred? Suspicion? The same fights over and over while other companies innovate and grow? Robert may have been wrong about destroying our families, but he was right about one thing. This feud is destroying us anyway, just more slowly." The mention of Robert made both older men pause. Richard spoke first, his voice tight. "Madison Chin's story comes out tomorrow?" "Yes," Adrian replied. "Everything. Robert's revenge plot, how close both companies came to ruin, and how working together saved them both. And yes, our relationship too." "The board will have questions," Marcus said, but some of the fury had drained from his voice. "Let them," Hazel responded. "Let them ask why the children of rival families found more value in cooperation than competition. Let them wonder if maybe 40 years of fighting has cost more than it's gained." Cameron, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke up. "The terminal contract suspension might be a blessing in disguise. Give both companies time to reassess, modernize, maybe even collaborate on some projects." "Collaborate?" Both fathers said the words simultaneously, then glared at each other for the jinx. "Why not?" Adrian asked. "Mitchell Shipping has the best loading logistics on the East Coast. We have the strongest international routes. Together." "Together," Richard interrupted, "is not a word I ever expected to hear in relation to Lancaster Shipping." "Then maybe it's time for new expectations." Hazel took Adrian's hand openly, watching both fathers track the gesture. "Because like it or not, this is happening. We're choosing a different path than the one you chose 40 years ago." The silence that followed felt heavy with decades of history, grudges, and missed opportunities. To the office windows, the sun was setting over Providence Harbor, painting the water in shades of possibility. Finally, Marcus Lancaster spoke, his voice gruff but somehow different. "Your mother," he said to Adrian, "always said this feud would end when someone was brave enough to choose love over pride." He looked at Hazel, then at her father. "I never thought it would be our children teaching us that lesson." Richard Mitchell stared out at the harbor, where both families' legacies floated side by side. "It won't be easy," he said quietly. 40 years of history doesn't just disappear." "No," Hazel agreed, squeezing Adrian's hand. "But maybe it's time to start writing a new history." The four of them stood there as darkness fell over Providence, the future unfolding before them like the harbor's lights reflecting on the water. Uncertain, challenging, but filled with possibilities none of them had imagined just hours before. The old world of Mitchell versus Lancaster was ending, and something new was about to begin. 6 months later, the Providence Maritime Museum's annual Winter Gala looked remarkably different from the previous year's event. Instead of carefully separated tables and tense civility, the Mitchell and Lancaster families shared the center table, their collective presence drawing curious glances from Providence's business elite. Hazel adjusted the silver nameplate in front of her seat. Hazel Mitchell Lancaster. The hyphenated surname still felt new on her tongue, but right, a bridge between two worlds that had been separate for far too long. Adrian's hand found hers under the table, a gesture that no longer needed to be hidden. The Journal's latest headline called it the marriage that saved Providence Shipping, Madison said from across the table, smirking at her friend's shared eye roll. A bit dramatic maybe, but not entirely wrong. The past 6 months had transformed both companies in ways no one could have predicted. After Madison's articles revealed both Robert's failed plot and the young couple's romance, public opinion had forced the families to rethink their feud. The suspended terminal contract had indeed proved a blessing, giving both companies time to modernize and, surprisingly, collaborate. "Your father's actually smiling," Adrian whispered to Hazel, nodding toward Richard Mitchell. who was deep in conversation with Marcus Lancaster about their joint logistics technology initiative, Robert's original idea finally given life through their combined resources. "So is yours," Hazel replied, watching Marcus laugh at something Cameron had said. Her brother had become an unexpected bridge between the families, his tech expertise helping implement the modernization both companies desperately needed. The sound of a glass being tapped drew everyone's attention to the podium, where Port Authority Chairman Walsh stood ready to make an announcement. The room quieted, anticipation building. "Ladies and gentlemen," Walsh began, "6 months ago, we suspended the terminal contract proceedings due to serious allegations of corruption and corporate espionage. Today, I'm pleased to announce that the contract has been awarded to the newly formed Mitchell-Lancaster Maritime Alliance." Applause filled the room, but Hazel barely heard it. She was watching her father and father-in-law, seeing the pride on their faces as they stood together to acknowledge the announcement. 6 months ago, they'd been bitter rivals. Now, they were partners in New England's most innovative shipping operation. "Should we tell them now?" Adrian murmured in her ear. Hazel touched her stomach, still flat but harboring their secret. A new generation of Mitchell-Lancasters, due to arrive in 7 months. "Let them enjoy this moment," she whispered back. "We'll tell them tomorrow." As dinner progressed, Hazel found herself studying the faces around the table. Madison, who had risked her friendship to investigate their relationship and ended up saving both families. Cameron, whose technical skills had helped transform their company's outdated systems. Even Robert, who after a brief jail stint was now consulting on the technology integration, closely supervised but contributing to the future he'd once tried to destroy. "Remember last year's gala?" Adrian asked softly, "when we snuck away to that balcony? How could I forget? I was terrified someone would see us talking. Want to sneak away again? For old time's sake?" Hazel smiled, rising from her chair. They made their way through the crowd to the same balcony where their story had begun. The December air was crisp, the harbor lights twinkling below like earthbound stars. "I've been thinking," Adrian said, pulling her close against the cold, "about what you said that day in my father's office, about writing a new history. And look at them in there. Our fathers planning expansions together, our mothers organizing joint charity events, Cameron teaching both companies' tech teams. We didn't just write a new history, we created a whole new world." Hazel turned in his arms to face him. "A better world. For everyone." Her hand drifted to her stomach again, including those who aren't here yet. Adrian's eyes widened as he caught her meaning. "Are you? When did you?" "Found out yesterday. Apparently our family's merger is going to be even more complete than we planned." His laugh of pure joy drew attention from inside, and suddenly their families were joining them on the balcony. Richard and Marcus, their wives, Cameron and Madison, all crowding around as Adrian announced the news. The celebration that followed felt like the final healing of an ancient wound. As Hazel watched her father embrace Adrian while Marcus hugged her mother, she remembered Robert's words about burning everything down to build something better. They had built something better, but not through destruction. They'd done it through love, through courage, through choosing a different path than the one laid out by previous generations. Later that night, as they walked along the Providence River where they'd once met in secret, Hazel and Adrian stopped to watch the ships in the harbor. Mitchell and Lancaster vessels now bearing the same flag, moving together through the dark water toward distant horizons. "You know what I just realized?" Adrian said, wrapping his coat around both of them. "Our child will never know the weight of choosing sides. They'll grow up in a world where Mitchell and Lancaster means unity, not division."